you. Today, I'm going to talk about 3 options every retiree has when they start to lose money and start to feel the panic. Things like September, this last September, 2023, we lost 5%. And people are asking, what should we be thinking about? What should we be doing? The 3 options are pretty simple, which you probably already know. You can hold the line. You can sit tight. You can do what we call the pull and push method, which is, should I pull my money out and then try to push it back in at the right time? And the last option is, I'm done. I'm exiting. I'm getting out of the stock market and I'm going to do something else. So I'm going to break down why each of these options can be a good option or a bad option for retirees. First, the hold option. When I think about the hold option, you've got time. A lot of times I'm going to say, if you need less than 25% of your investments to live off of, and you're thinking, you know what, I don't have income needs that really need to be serviced from these investments, then this is a probably good indicator that you should be comfortable holding the line and weathering the storm of a stock market crash, because your primary need here is generational transfers. You're thinking about leaving money to generations, down the line, kids, grandkids. You're not worrying about spending that money to service your retirement expenses. And what that means usually is it's a 25 plus year hold. You're thinking about generational distributing. And the reason why is, it takes time to make back money when you lose it. Some quick numbers here. If you lose 10%, you don't have to just make 10% back. You have to make 11% back to get back to even. If you lose 20%, you have to make 25% to get back to even. And then it goes down to 30, 43%. And last, if you lose 40% of the market, like some people did back in 2000 or 2008-9, you have to grow 67% because your money's smaller. The idea being, if you are holding, you should feel comfortable not relying on that money to live on. Next up, we have the pull and push. This one gives me the willies. When you really think about it, this is a risky proposition, folks. The reason is no one can consistently do it. The idea being, when do I pull the money out? Have we hit the stock market, base? Are we in the valley? Is it still going down? And then when do we put it back in? Are we done crashing? How do we know when the pain is over of a stock market crash? So this makes this a high risk solution. And a lot of times, if people need more than 25% of their retirement assets to live off of, I don't like this option. I think it's too risky for retirees, basically because of the risk of the boomerang. Now, the boomerang, when you see over the last 20 years, has some interesting numbers. The boomerang is I have to get the ride back up for the market to make sense. So that sometimes if I'm pulling out, I may miss the opportunity that bounces back up, and that will screw up all my returns for the hold method. For example, in 2001, 2002, the stock market lost 33%. Now, if you did the push and pull method, right? The pull and push method, and you decided to take your money out and you missed the upswing of 03 and 04, it bounced back 39% those 2 years. If you waited an extra year, it would screw up your entire planning and you may never get back to even. Same thing happened back in 2008. If you remember the subprime market, it crashed 36%. The S&P crashed 36%, but it bounced back 25% the following year. That's why this is so risky. I do not like this under any circumstances. If your financial advisor is talking about timing the market or taking some chips off the table and then putting them back in, I would probably run for the hills. Because for me, I've never seen any data where people can do this consistently and safely for retirees. Now, the last is the exit. This is where someone said, you know what, I've had enough of the roller coaster. I am not buying a ticket anymore. A lot of times this is for someone that's saying, you know what, my income needs are too important. I need to use 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 100% of my retirement investments to live off of, and I can't weather the storm of a 30% loss, a 20% loss. So the idea is we need to start exploring alternative options out there of things that have fixed principal. There's a lot of investments out there with those interest rates that are very appealing out there. We're seeing CDs, we're seeing annuities, we're seeing fixed index annuities, even some bonds out there that are seeing coupons being clipped north of 4 or 5, and even sometimes 6%. So I think this is a very interesting option if you're getting out of the market to explore. And what I'll tell folks is this. When you look back and say, well, the market always does 8%. Well, let's think about in terms of, has it really? Because that's what everybody says. Since 2000, folks, the S&P's only done 6.9%. That's been the average annual return. And to make it a little scarier, that's actually not true, because if you're paying 1% to your financial advisor, It's only done 5.9%. Now, the longer you hold, going back to the benefits of the whole program, the better the returns get. If you go back to 1990, we've seen a 7.39% return on the S&P for the whole method. Go back to 1980, 11%. Guys, this is when it starts to make sense. We're talking about 40 years. 50 years. Again, 1970, 11% return on the S&P. The idea being if you don't need the money and it can sit there a long time, it can weather the ups and downs of the stock market, which makes it pretty interesting. So when we sit there and say, I only have about 15 to 30 years in retirement, a lot of times we don't have that time to swing back up. So that's why at times we recommend the exit for people that actually need to use their income in retirement. Now, I know I'm going to tease one more thing. I got to talk about inflation because I know some of you are going to email me and say, well, Gregory, what about outpacing inflation? Oh my gosh. So inflation to me is a little bit of a kangaroo math, if you will. I think people use it to their benefit to scare people into the hold method that probably shouldn't be in it. And let me explain to you why. You know, if inflation is really cranking like we say it is, at 10% inflation a year, the cost would double every 7 years. That's a fun way to look at it. So I had some fun. I looked up some commodities. Milk. We've been hearing about the cost of milk nonstop. So guess what? In 2018, milk was cheaper than it was in 2004. That's not on an adjusted basis. It was cheaper per gallon in 2004. Another funny thing, in 30 years, guys, the cost of milk hasn't even doubled. It's supposed to double every 7 years if we have 10% inflation here. In 30 years, the cost of milk has not even doubled. And ironically, in the last 15 years, you ready for this? The cost of milk has only increased by 8%. So sometimes we have to dig into the numbers because people say, well, I need to get at least 3 or 4% return because I have to beat inflation. I need 7% return because I need to beat inflation. And they start taking on risk where they can lose 40% to grab 1%. To me, that math doesn't make sense. Do the common sense. Look what you're actually spending. Look what your retirement accounts are actually doing when you're driving this decision. So when the stock market is rocking and rolling and it's a little scary, remember there's 3 options you can rely on. Break them down one by one. Take your time and make sure you do what's best for you and your family, not what's best for your financial advisor. Thanks for tuning in. If you get a chance, subscribe to Expedition Retirement.